In early 2026, Ukrainian intelligence quietly released an assessment that sent shockwaves through European security circles. According to Kyiv, Russia was preparing to deploy a new category of ballistic missile on the territory of Belarus, the Oreshnik system. At first glance, the announcement sounded familiar. Another missile, another threat, another warning from the intelligence war surrounding Ukraine. But beneath the surface, this development represented something far more serious. A deliberate shift in Russia's nuclear posture on Europe's doorstep. The Oreshnik missile is not a conventional battlefield weapon. It belongs to a class of intermediate-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Its value lies not in its explosive power alone, but in what it changes strategically: distance, reaction time, and decision-making under pressure. According to Ukrainian intelligence, construction is already underway in Belarus. Launch infrastructure, command and control systems, surveillance assets, and secure communications are being installed. The system is not yet fully operational, but it does not need to be. The signal has already been sent. Russia is moving its most sensitive weapons closer to European capitals. From Belarusian territory, Oreshnik missiles would dramatically reduce warning times for targets across Central and Western Europe. Cities such as Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, and potentially even Paris would fall within a compressed strike window measured in minutes rather than tens of minutes. In nuclear strategy, minutes matter. The shorter the warning time, the greater the pressure on decision-makers. Detection, verification, consultation, and response all collapse into a dangerously narrow time frame. This increases the risk of miscalculation, exactly the kind of instability nuclear doctrine is supposed to avoid. This is not accidental. The deployment of Oreshnik fits a pattern that has defined Russian strategy since the invasion of Ukraine: controlled escalation without immediate detonation. Moscow repeatedly pushes the boundary, not to cross it outright, but to force its adversaries to recalibrate. The Kremlin understands that nuclear weapons do not need to be fired to be effective. Their mere positioning alters behavior. For Belarus, the situation is even more precarious. President Alexander Lukashenko has publicly framed the deployment as a defensive measure, a shield to protect Belarus from NATO aggression. Official statements emphasize deterrence, sovereignty, and partnership with Russia. But Ukrainian intelligence and Western analysts tell a different story. Belarus will not control these weapons. The Oreshnik missiles, once deployed, will remain under the direct command of Russia's strategic forces. Launch authority, targeting decisions, and operational control will reside in Moscow, not Minsk. Belarusian territory becomes a hosting platform, not a sovereign actor. In practical terms, this turns Belarus into a forward operating base for Russian nuclear strategy. This arrangement mirrors previous deployments of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, but Oreshnik represents a qualitative escalation. Intermediate-range systems bridge the gap between battlefield nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles. They are designed for regional coercion, precisely the kind of leverage Russia seeks over Europe. The timing is also telling. Russia is under sustained pressure on multiple fronts: militarily bogged down in Ukraine, economically constrained by sanctions, politically isolated in much of the Western world. Under these conditions, Moscow turns to its most reliable instrument of influence: strategic fear. By placing nuclear-capable missiles in Belarus, Russia externalizes its pressure. It shifts the conversation away from Ukrainian territory and toward European vulnerability. The battlefield becomes psychological as much as physical. Ukrainian intelligence views this move as an attempt to redraw the escalation ladder. Instead of responding to Ukrainian actions on the front lines, Russia threatens Europe directly. The implicit message is clear: continued support for Ukraine carries existential risks. But there is another layer. The Oreshnik deployment also serves as a test, not of hardware, but of resolve. Moscow is probing how Europe and NATO react when nuclear proximity increases without a shot being fired. Will there be restraint, dialogue, concessions, or will deterrence harden? For decades, European security architecture rested on distance. The Cold War placed nuclear weapons far away, behind layers of buffers and treaties. Oreshnik erodes that buffer. It brings strategic weapons into the heart of Eastern Europe under the cover of alliance and consent, at least on paper, because Belarus's consent is increasingly questionable. Lukashenko's regime depends almost entirely on Moscow for survival. Since the 2020 protests, Belarus has lost meaningful political autonomy. Economic integration, military coordination, intelligence sharing all have deepened to the point where analysts now describe Belarus not as an ally, but as an extension of Russian strategic depth. The Oreshnik deployment formalizes that reality. It turns silent dependence into visible subordination, and it places Belarus squarely in the line of fire in any future confrontation between Russia and NATO. Whether Minsk wants it or not, its territory becomes a priority target in strategic planning. This is the paradox of nuclear protection. The weapons meant to deter aggression also guarantee attention and vulnerability. Ukraine understands this dynamic intimately. That is why Kyiv chose to reveal the Oreshnik preparations early, not to provoke panic, but to shape the narrative before Moscow could frame the deployment as routine or benign. By exposing the infrastructure phase, Ukrainian intelligence signals that escalation is deliberate, planned, and reversible if pressure is applied early enough. The message to Europe is implicit but urgent. This is not about Belarusian defense. It is about Russian leverage. Oreshnik is not aimed at Kyiv. It is aimed at Brussels, Berlin, Paris, and at the political will that sustains Ukraine's resistance.